Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again. And that must mean that I am Professor Robert E.G. Black, and this is the Groundhog Day Project.
It's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about.
It's a thing where the same day keeps happening.
Time.
I wake up every day right here, right in Punxsutawney, and it's always February 2nd.
The last revision is what counts, apparently.
This minute we make it, finally. Phil doesn't know it yet, but this is the last resumption of the loop, to use Richard Lupoff's term from 1201. The last iteration we see. This is the 34th iteration of February 2nd that we see in the film. Just before we get there, we get a second or two of Phil in the alley, looking up into the sky, exhaling one more time. The old man no longer does. And then the film moves on, and so should we. Then we get into a weird practical thing, because we cut to Phil doing his final report. He doesn't know it's his final report, but it's his final report for the time loop. He's in a different place than he usually does his report, so I'm thinking they moved to the spot he suggested several minutes ago when he brought pastries and coffee, because normally the gazebo is not behind Phil on this angle. Also, normally, the other reporters are not listening to him. They don't have their mics over. And there's this moment before we get to the first line of his little spiel here. I have to assume that he's been talking for several minutes. I assume that he's been doing a really long monologue that is elaborate and poetic and beautiful. Like the other reporters did their things, and then as they were about to put stuff away, realized he's still talking. And then they started listening. And one of them turned their mic over on him and got their camera on him. And then another one did. And then another one did. And then the inner circle guys realized, wait, what are the reporters doing? Why they all circled around this one guy? And they started listening. And so they're down there. And everyone is circled around Phil when we get to this shot. You don't think about it when you're watching the film, normally. But it's hard to get to this little beat organically. Phil has to be at the tail end of a long monologue that really grabbed everyone's attention as they were done with their business. Then, of course, we get to his line. I bought a book of Chekhov's plays when I was doing the blog, and I was going to read them because I wanted to be familiar enough with this to point out why it's a bad reference. I did find research, other people saying it's a bad reference, but I understand what Danny Rubin was going for. He's going for a reference that we all accept, even if we don't 100% understand it. We get it without knowing it, if you understand what I'm differentiating between there. The distinction being, we've heard of Chekhov. We reference Chekhov in relation to, like Phil, cold Russian theater, unfeeling. From what I understand of Chekhov's plays, they're actually quite funny. And the stoic Russian symbology is more come from outside Chekhov than inside Chekhov. But it feels like a nice reference here.
Jumping in from editing, because you should also understand that this does come from a reference from Rubin's original, but it was even less specific. After the final report, Rita says to Phil, "You did a really nice job today. Really nice." Phil, "Thanks. That means a lot to me." Rita, "That was great what you did there with Chekhov and Long Winter." Phil, "Yeah, well." Rita, "You don't expect that kind of thing from a weatherman. I didn't expect it." Actually, I guess that's not the final report. It's not the final iteration, because I just noticed the next scene, it cuts to interior bed and breakfast corridor, dawn, as Phil approaches the chubby man, so it's not the final day.
As he starts and says, when Chekhov saw the long winter, he saw a winter bleak and dark and bereft of hope. Yet we know that winter is just another step in the cycle of a life. But standing here among the people of Punxsutawney and basking in the warmth of their hearts and hearts, I couldn't imagine a better fate than a long and lustrous winter. From Punxsutawney, it's Phil Connors. So long. And people applaud. And Larry. Who says nice speech, Phil? Wait. My transcript doesn't have names. It just has the lines. Nice speech, Phil. Let's see. Is that Rita? No, because he says, how was that for you two, to Rita and Larry? So, is it Buster says it? Nice speech, Phil? How does Buster know who he is? He just happens to watch Channel 9 in Pittsburgh. I mean, he could.
It was one of the reporters. And I'm pretty sure it was ADR, so it's not the reporter that actually goes up to Phil right after he finishes. And then another reporter, one says, "Nice speech, Phil." One says, "Thank you." I think it's Phil that says thanks. But B, how would they know who he is? He just said, from Punxsutawney, it's Phil Connors. And this is the place where, in Punxsutawney, there's a Punxsutawney Phil. Anyone who just listened to that speech, which is everyone up on Gobbler's Knob, knows his name. Oh, silly me. Silly, silly me.
Nice speech, Phil. Thank you. Thanks. Then Phil says, "How was that for you two?" Larry says, "Man, you touched me." "Thanks, Larry. Thank you. I gotta go." Rita says, "Phil, that was surprising. I didn't know you were so versatile." "I surprise myself sometimes." That's a great response. Because it's funny, but it's not sarcastic, and it's not rude. He's not lashing out at her, but it's amusing. It's simple. And she's like, "Where are you going? Would you like to get some coffee?" "Dude, you are in, Phil." He was pursuing her so much before, and now she's asking him out. She is so intrigued by whatever long speech he just did. We only heard the last few sentences of it, and it seemed pretty good. And we see all these other people listening, which means it was not only really good, it was long. And Rita loves it. As a producer, she's like, "Yeah, I got content. My first location gig is amazing. Thank you, Phil. I thought you were an asshole yesterday." But he's like, "I'd love to. Can I have a rain check? I've got some errands I've got to run. Okay?" And he goes to leave, and the minute ends. She won't get to respond until next minute. Yeah, that's actually all I've got for 83, I think. Because this one's simple. It's the Chekhov speech. It's important, but it's also not necessarily correct as a reference. But we kind of accept it because it is correct as a reference for people who, it might just be certain translations of Chekhov or reading other Russian stuff. What have I read that's Russian? I read Dr. Zhivago in high school. Hated it. Don't remember a thing about it, other than I think the woman's name was Laura. The only other Russian book I've read is in college. As a history major, we had to read Dead Souls, which was actually a pretty funny book, even though I don't think I got all of the humor of it. I could see where the humor was, because it's a sort of satire about this guy who is deliberately buying, because the way serfdom worked in communist Russia, no, this is Imperial Russia, you effectively own the serfs that work off of your property. It's not the same as slavery in the U.S., but it's close. They kind of take care of themselves, they work for you, and in exchange they get land. It's fiefdom kind of stuff, that kind of structure. And when people die, when a serf dies, they're still kind of on your books until the end of the next year, and then you take them off the books. But in the meantime, for tax purposes, population purposes, they still exist. So this guy goes around to these different people who own property, and each of them has a slightly different vibe and weird quirk about them, which is part of the satire and part of the stuff I didn't necessarily get the joke, but I understood it was a joke going through. But the plot itself is a joke because he is buying the serfs that are dead. And they're like, "Well, yeah, they're dead. You can have them, whatever." And so he's buying these things really cheap. But then what he's effectively buying is, when it comes later in that year, he now owns, according to books, all of these serfs. He has turned himself into a rich person, noble or whatever, without actually owning the property or having any people actually working his property. He owns people that don't exist anymore. But in the present, they are still on the books, they are still real, they still count. And so it's like this weird satire. I need to watch, since I apparently can't get around to reading, I need to watch like the film version. I think there's a few of Uncle Vanya, which I know there's like at least three different movie versions, I think. It's a play by Chekhov. What's another one of his? Three Sisters. I think there's a movie version of that. There was recently a theater production, like a live stage version of one of his somewhere around LA, and I missed it because I didn't notice till its run was basically over. I would love to see some Chekhov. I would love to have time to go back and read, but I don't read so fast as I used to when I was younger. So I'm not going to try to read some Chekhov, because reading play scripts is hard if you don't have big blocks of time, at least for me. But even if the Chekhov reference is probably inaccurate, because Chekhov's actually pretty funny, and didn't see a bleak and dark winter bereft of hope, it's a nice line, it sounds poetic, it makes Phil sound fancy, and I don't even think we're supposed to take it, if we understand that it's slightly inaccurate, as Phil being wrong. This is Harold Ramis being wrong. Or no, this is Danny Rubin being wrong, right? Because this speech was in the original? No, the speech wasn't in the original, but the reference to it was, where I believe Larry says a line about like that Chekhov thing was great, or something like that, or maybe Rita does. One of them comments on Phil's Chekhov line, but we don't hear the Chekhov line. The Chekhov line came from Ramis, I believe, the actual line.
Jumping in one more time, because now that I do have access to the first revision by Danny Rubin, published in Scenario Magazine, I can tell you, the Chekhov speech looks like word for word comes from that second draft, the first revision. So, it's entirely Danny Rubin. He's the one who got it wrong. But as I already kind of said, it's not that, yes, I think he's getting it wrong, but also it doesn't necessarily play badly if Phil is incorrect, because we don't generally know he's incorrect. Danny knew he got it wrong. In his book, How to Write Groundhog Day, he actually has a footnote about the Chekhov reference in the original. He writes, after quoting the full speech again, I don't remember whether somebody asked me to write this speech, or whether it just arose organically from the new structure, but the idea pretty obviously came from this little throwaway line by Rita. I have seen several productions of Chekhov's plays and know him to be revered in Russia and the world over. I am aware that much of the delicious bleakness I attribute to his work is a result of some faulty translations and a long history of productions that reflect this. I've heard that in his own language, he's largely thought of as being very funny. Personally, I do not love Chekhov's plays. I try, but I'm not above pretending I understand him by throwing out knowing speeches like this one. It worked, of course, to show Phil's leap in sophistication and empathy to have him reference Chekhov in this speech, so I didn't feel too bad about using it.
In Rubin's original, Phil had made a reference to Chekhov. But anyway, Phil's got errands to run. We are on the final iteration of February 2nd that we see in the film, and we'll get more of that next time. In the meantime, I don't know, go watch a play. Go see some live theater. Chekhov if you can. And then give me a report. Find me on social media and tell me how the Chekhov play you went to see was. Tell me if it was bleak and dark and bereft of hope. Tell me if it had anything to do with a long winter, for that matter. And have a good time.
Knew you were gonna say that.
This has been a production of Lemming Drops Studio. You can find links to more at lemmingdrops.com or join the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. Also, you can support all my shows at patreon.com/lemmingdrops.
What is wrong in the end which never comes? Or which comes again and again, laughing, like waves.
Since the Big Bang set everything in motion, everything that happens in this universe has to be the way it is. Particles unfolding the way they're destined to.
How do you sleep at night? You've never seen Groundhog Day?
Yeah, you know Groundhog Day is not a documentary.
Remember when Groundhog Day was just a movie?
One more thing from editing. This was a short episode, so whatever. It's a line from Chekhov, from the book The Murder. It looked as though his dreaminess were coming over him again, and as ill luck would have it, although it was the end of March, every day it kept snowing, and the forest roared as though it were winter, and there was no believing that spring would ever come. The weather disposed one to depression, and to quarreling, and to hatred, and in the night, when the wind droned over the ceiling, it seemed as though someone were living overhead in the empty story. Little by little, the broodings settled like a burden on his mind. His head burned, and he could not sleep.